Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Gadomski, head of tape evangelism for Fujifilm Recording Media USA. And I'd like to welcome you to our virtual roundtable to answer the question, is tape really eco-friendly? And to provide answers to that question, I'm pleased to be joined by a group of very distinguished industry experts from Microsoft Azure, CERN, IBM, and Brad Johns Consulting. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for participating. So let's take a couple of minutes to let our panelists introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Jason? Please tell us what you do for Microsoft Azure, and what are some of your key sustainability initiatives at Microsoft?
Thanks, Rich. So my name is Jason Adrian. I'm a principal hardware architect for Microsoft Azure Storage. Work on the gamut of storage media from the fastest, the slowest, and everything in between. And one of the key things from Microsoft is we want to make sure we're doing the right thing for the planet. Our goals are by 2030, we're going to be carbon negative and water positive. That's a pretty aggressive target that's only 9 years away. So we're doing everything in our power, from our data centers to our consumer business, to make sure we're heading in the right direction.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Jason. Vladimir, please introduce yourself and what are some of CERN's key initiatives around sustainability?
My name is Vladimir, and for the past 15 years, I've been responsible for the tape archive at CERN. And CERN is following the high-level European strategy for particle physics. And in the scope of this strategy, obviously, all fundamental research aspects have to be periodically reviewed and assessed from the environmental perspective. So CERN is following that.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And I'll pass it over to Sean, if you could unmute and introduce yourself.
Well, thanks, Rich. Dr. Sean Brumet. I'm the hypergrowth storage product manager at IBM, which is a fancy word of handling very large storage requirements. And I'm also deep diving on sustainability research for tape. IBM, being a centennial company, has been around for a long time, and we have those same types of goals: net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, using more renewable aspects by 2030. And one of the things we've really prided taking leadership in is we have been reporting publicly our environmental goals and the results for over 30 years.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Sean. And we'll turn it over to Brad.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you for the invitation to join the discussion this morning. I have my own independent consulting company. I've been doing consulting for 10 plus years with my focus initially primarily on the economics of different storage technologies. Prior to that, I'd had a 30 plus year career with IBM, in which the last decade or so I've been spending on data storage, marketing, and product support.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, for those introductions. So let's get into the subject matter. Is tape really eco-friendly? And let's start with Brad. So Brad, you've done extensive research into the energy usage and CO2 profile of both tape systems and hard disk drives. Can you just briefly share your findings from that research?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It's been an exciting evolution. Like I mentioned, that the initial focus was on economics of different storage technologies, but one aspect of that is certainly their energy consumption profiles. And in the last couple of years, with the increased focus on sustainability and carbon emissions, it's been a pretty straightforward migration to take some of those techniques that we used for looking at costs to apply those to derive estimates for carbon dioxide emissions. So it's been kind of an exciting time. Of course, it's a hot topic right now with the change in administrations in the U.S. government and a tremendous focus, I think, across the businesses, large and small, on sustainability. This focus isn't going to go away. And then at the same time, there's been dramatic increases in the amount of data that's being stored. In fact, industry analysts are talking about in 5 years that the world will be storing 17 zettabytes of information. And ironically, a lot of that information is sitting on spinning disk and is not necessarily active data. In fact, it might be considered cold data. And that's really been the focus that in the last year or two we've been looking at. It's not to say that tape is the ultimate solution, obviously not, if you have active data. But if there's cold data, there's an opportunity there to migrate or store information initially on tape and accrue some substantial benefits. For example, in the paper that we published last year, which really looked at the total system view and took a fairly moderate-sized installation, I think it was 10 petabytes, and it was growing at 30% a year. We determined that we could reduce carbon emissions by 87% by storing 10 petabytes of information on tape as opposed to leaving it cold on disk. And that was accomplished, interestingly enough, by reducing costs by 86% over that same period. So it was one of those initiatives that's not free, right? There's still work required to identify the cold data and migrate the cold data. But it certainly provides an opportunity to reduce costs and maybe even fund the migration project. Then this year, in fact, the paper we just published this summer really just looked at the media itself and said, well, a much larger environment, 100 petabytes, well, what if we need to store 100 petabytes for a decade? And just compared the total life cycle of the media. So looking at the life cycle from tape media, from manufacturing to usage to disposal, and compared that to the hard disk drive and looking at those same components. And we saw some pretty dramatic savings with some fairly reasonable assumption that saw the CO2 emissions, just looking at the media itself, being 95% less on tape. That's total life cycle view, as opposed to hard disk drives, and a dramatic reduction, 80% reduction in the amount of e-waste over that decade. So it's a great opportunity there for organizations that are looking to establish sustainability goals to not only achieve significant reductions in carbon emissions, but also potentially to save large amounts of money too.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brad, for that brief overview. So sounds like 87% reduction in usage in one scenario. And then when you look at cradle to grave or the full life cycle, 95% reduction and potential savings of 80% in terms of e-waste. So that really sounds great. It's on paper. But what about real world applications? And that's why we really want to hear from Jason and Vlad. Are you seeing those kind of environmental benefits and is an energy savings, and is tape helping you meet your sustainability goals? So Jason, let's start with you.
Sure. So let's talk about sustainability and environmentally friendly. We've talked about the power, but there's also the materials that go into the devices, whether it's a hard drive, a tape drive, or tape media. So if we break it down to two pieces, let's start with the power, and I'll build on what Brad said. In a very cold environment where the data is not going to be touched very often, tape often shows up as the forefront. It is offline media, you store it, and it really takes no power when it's offline. In reality, we don't quite get to complete offline. We do consistency checks, but it does tend to be substantially lower power than hard drives. Over the last decade, you've seen many different platforms come out where we can spin down a hard drive to try to get close to the power savings of tape. And that can close the gap quite a bit. It's debatable on different workloads, does that get you to power parity? But for argument's sake, let's say it gets us close. So from a power perspective, hard drives can start getting close. Now, what hard drives can't do is when we start talking about the materials that go into them. When you're building a hard drive, whether you keep it spun up, taking power or not, there's still a lot of material that go in that, from aluminum or glass, magnets, electronics. And that's kind of where you see hard drives and tape start to diverge in the materials that are going in there. In a tape cartridge, you get high capacity. And when it's offline, you don't have to worry about a 1-to-1 ratio of the drive elements, the heads that go into it, all the chemicals that are used to manufacture that. The heads that go into tape are very similar to ones that go into hard drives. Anytime you're talking about silicon and assembly, there's waste from the fabrication, the shipping. So when you actually take that into account in a cool environment, in a cool workload that we use tape for, you actually can save quite a bit in materials. So when you take the material savings and you take the power savings, tape actually does offer quite a bit of an advantage compared to other technologies that are on the market today.
All right. Well, thanks again, Jason. And I'd like to turn it over to Vlad now. Vlad, what are your observations about tape, and is it helping you meet your sustainability goals?
Well, we have been using tape for over 50 years at CERN, so we have good understanding of the technology, and we are benefiting from this knowledge that we have in house. Also, not only from the history, but also from the software perspective, where we have been periodically updating and writing the software. So we are fully aware that there is now a possibility to have hard drives that can spin down and like this save some power on when they are not in use. However, this completely changes the workflow that you have in the house. You have to completely redo it, and this is something that it adds complexity. Okay, and our archive, compared to many other archives, is not a super cold archive. It's actually active archive, and as I said, for the past 50 years, the tapes is a natural building block in this system. So that's why we are using it. So looking at the environmentals, CERN is a little bit special user overall, I would say, because the big bulk of electricity is used actually for the accelerators, such as the one you can see behind me, and the electricity consumption in the computer center is just a small fraction.
All right, thank you very much for those observations, Vladimir. And we also have Sean from IBM. Sean, what are you seeing in the broader market? And is tape resonating as an eco-friendly solution and helping folks meet their sustainability goals?
Well, thanks, Rich. As Jason indicated and Vlad indicated, energy is always a big part of that when you start the discussion. But we've seen a lot of interest from not only our hyperscale and hyperscale light partners, but from other areas of business who want to know that they're reaching their smaller sustainability goals. And there's been a lot of interest on the true product lifecycle standardization. As Jason inferred, you have to look at all the materials. And the interest from the broader market is, tell me about the overall materials from, pulling them out of the ground all the way until we recycle them, whether the recycling goes back into other products or that we have to create e-waste. Is it helping our customers? We've really broke it down into a byproduct capability for our customers to compare their products. And what we found is not just in response, but in analysis, you can bring the total CO2e, so the equivalent CO2s, down to 0.42 metric tons per year per petabyte with tape, which for most customers is 2 to 4 times better in the overall life cycle than HDDs, and believe it or not, 2 to 4 times better than flash SSDs. So we are seeing a lot of good response in the market, and customers are seeing that tape represents significant sustainability value.
And I think you've been busy submitting energy conservation and sustainability profiles to customers. I've seen some of your work.
Yeah, we have. And I think the good part about it is we supplied this from IBM's point of view and from the tape industry's point of view in a manner that allows our customers to build their solution and look at the solution, not just here's a piece of tape, here's a drive, which are pretty easy to make comparisons with.
Jason, does that make sense, what Sean is saying? If you could unmute, and do you have any response to Sean's observations?
I think those are excellent observations. I obviously can't comment on the exact comparisons. It depends on the use case, how many drives to how many tapes. But yes, in general, you should find that in cooler workloads, tape is going to produce a lot less e-waste than comparable technologies today, including flash. I mean, if we had the lowest cost flash and we could scale up infinitely, then sure, flash has a lot of advantages, but the physics in the market just really don't lend ourselves to putting everything on flash today. And that's going to be a long time, decades, before that even becomes feasible.
And how about you, Vlad? Any comments to what Sean said and what IBM is studying and looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to highlight the fact that CERN is going to build a new computer center in a nearby area, and there we are going to completely review the environmentals of the whole building, and that is precisely the moment when we are looking at sustainability of the whole IT infrastructure. The tape is not going to be part of that building because the tape can utilize older building, where we can lower down the electricity usage. Tape does not need so much electricity in the longer term. So that is why it is more suitable for buildings where you cannot completely control the environment.
Then, Brad, from your perspective now, having done the research and hearing from the end users, I'm sure you've got some questions.
Well, it's been an interesting discussion. Yeah, it sounds like I guess I'm kind of walking away with a conclusion rather than maybe a discussion. But this seems like it's a very timely topic across some very large users who are actively looking at ways to minimize their impact on CO2 emissions and sustainability and improve sustainability. And it's pretty exciting, actually, to see the industry's off and running.
All right, great. So just in terms of wrapping up, are there any other comments that either Jason or CERN, are there any other benefits of tape in addition to sustainability that you want to talk about, or any other comments on your sustainability issues as we begin to wrap up today?
I think we've covered it pretty well in the panel. I think you've heard about the energy savings, you've heard about material savings, and you've seen a bunch of us have targets of 2030. So we're all actively working to address those as quickly as possible.
And I just want to say thank you so much for participating. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.